Hello everybody, welcome to another review. Today I'm so excited to be reviewing my first ever physical arc, that is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Now I was really excited to record and get this book for a number of reasons. I'll say 3 reasons. The first one I already mentioned. This is my first physical arc ever, which I think is just so cool. So excited to do it. Thanks to the people at Orbit who approved and sent me this copy. Secondly, this is, in my opinion, one of the coolest cover art. Here, I'll do everything there. Some of the coolest cover art to come out in years. I just love the style. I love the scale of this. I love the intrigue that this gives me. I don't know, everything about this I thought was really well done. So I was excited to actually read the book. Third reason I was excited to review this is John Gwynne himself. He's a fairly famous fantasy author, especially on BookTube. People know his Faithful and the Fallen series and really enjoy it, or they know his Blood and Bone series and really enjoy it. But I have not read either of those. So I was excited to read this because I thought I could bring a somewhat rare perspective to a review, in the sense that this will be my first contact with any of Gwynne's writing. So I will not have any of the baggage or knowledge of the other series to help me in this. So it's really sort of a blank slate as far as judging the author. Understand, I'm not saying like those other reviewers who have read those other things like can't review books. Obviously, you should review books that you like. I'm just saying I offer a somewhat unique perspective on this book. So let's talk about it. The Shadow of the Gods. This is the first book in what's called the Bloodsworn Trilogy, I believe. Maybe Bloodsworn. I think it's Bloodsworn. Book 1 in the Bloodsworn Trilogy. It follows primarily 3, I shouldn't say primarily, actually it follows only 3 characters. First character perspective we get is someone called Orca, O-R-K-A, I think like the whale, right? Isn't Orca a kind of whale spelled differently? Anyway, she is a woman warrior who's living in her own like little steading / farm area with her partner. I don't know if they say husband or not, but her male partner as well as their son. And they're just living basically a regular life, but right away we're given the idea that she does in some ways have a not darker, but more violent past. She was a warrior that traveled in bands before. Second perspective we have is Varg. Varg is a runaway slave, and again, we're not given a ton of his past at the beginning. As you go through the book, you will explore more about what his motivations are. All you know when you first meet him is that he is a runaway slave, that he wants revenge for something that was done to his sister, but it's unclear what or when or how that came to being. And very early on, he runs into a company of warriors called the Bloodsworn, which you can guess is going to be very important since the whole trilogy is called the Bloodsworn Trilogy. The third perspective we get is a female warrior by the name of Elvar, and she is already actively part of a mercenary company or a band of warriors called the Battlegrim. So it's interesting in our 3 characters, we have sort of the whole spectrum of warrior experience, as far as we have Orca, who's basically a retired warrior, or at least trying to be a retired worker. We have Elvar, and she is currently in this warrior band trying to gain glory and fame through her acts of violence and battle. They call it battle lore. And then we have Varg, who is very young and potentially going to become a warrior. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he is going to become a warrior. So it's interesting in that respect, the choices of perspective that Gwynne has given to us. And one of the real strengths of this book, I will say right away, is the rhythm of the plot of those 3 main character perspectives, because they're separated for basically the entire book. They're, you can kind of tell different places and that they're in the same world, but they're not interacting with one another. And each story as they weave, because you get character perspectives from one to the other. They always change from chapter to chapter between those three, and you never get a back-to-back. So you have to always be ready to switch between those perspectives, and Gwynne does a very good job of having different speeds in each of those perspectives, if that makes sense. With the exception of the ending, where all of them are sort of action-packed, none of the stories are ever in the same place. So for example, if Elbar's story is sort of a quiet moment where there's a lot of like character development or talking or like, you know, travel, then Orca is going to be a more action heavy section of her storyline. And then maybe Varg is doing one or the other. So there's never really a large period of inactivity or where the whole plot is sort of dragging. Like if any of the particular single perspectives is going a little slow, something exciting and different is happening in one of the other two. And these chapters are also not very long. Each chapter is somewhere between like 8 to, I think the longest is probably like 17 pages. So they're quick chapters. So even if you're at a part in one person's story that you're not really loving, you know that in like 10 minutes you're going to be into another story that you're probably very excited about or has a mystery involved or something along those way. So it's a very quick and easy read in that sense, and it really pushes you towards the ending that really does have a bang finish. You've heard of the Sanderlanche before. This is definitely a Gwynnelanche. Hurrigwyn. I'm gonna say Hurrigwyn. Cyclone, Cygwyn. I'm gonna say Hurrigwyn. I think that's fun. We'll see if that catches on. Anyway, there's a very good ending where a lot of the story sort of comes together in some parts and is a huge but good and satisfying cliffhanger at the end towards the second book, which I believe Gwynne at this point in time has already finished. So we know that we're gonna get that semi-soon in the realm of fantasy, waiting for next book in the series is, but it has a good ending that way, and it is a really good, fast read. The characters are interesting. It's sort of a positive and negative for me, because all of those three main characters I really, really like. I root for them. I want them to succeed. But at the same time, I found myself having trouble intensely connecting with them on a deeper level than just a basic wanting a protagonist to succeed, if that makes sense. And I don't exactly know why that is. My guess is because the plot is so fast and there are so many action elements that it didn't give me enough breathing time or time to sit down and get to know these characters enough to have a deeper emotional impact and connection with them than I sort of naturally did as a reader. So it's sort of a positive and negative in that sense, because, as I said, one of the strengths of this book is how quick it is to read, how action-filled it is, how the plot really just drives forward. And so you might lose that if you slow things down. You probably would in some ways. So it's kind of a give and take there as far as the character section of this review. The world, I should say, is fantastic. I really enjoyed how Viking inspired or Norse inspired, however you want to say it is. And unashamedly so, from the names of the characters, which are sometimes hard to remember for someone who's not from that culture, like distinguishing wise, like Svig versus Slag versus Torvald. Like in some ways it sort of like runs together in your mind just because you're not used to that. But I love that Gwynne is unashamedly going to keep that culture consistent. You definitely want to know what a seax is if you're wondering, or a sex. It's a long knife. They use that word a lot. I had to look it up. I never heard before. Especially having been someone who reread Beowulf earlier this year, you can see the incredible impact of the Northern mythology on this book. I mean, even down to the war leaders being called ring givers and providers. And that's a huge theme in Beowulf, who Beowulf is, and also carries through here. So I really, really loved that. The whole idea here is that the gods had a big war amongst themselves about 300 years before the beginning of this book. And basically they wiped each other out. It was a huge stalemate that led to the death of all of the gods. And as you find out as you read through this, many of the bones of the gods or elements of their mythology are still physically in the world and give different powers to like cities, or you can use them for a sword, and that gives it sort of weird characteristics. And also the blood of the gods is still in some particular people in the world, and it makes those particular people either better fighters or like more attractive and cunning. It's sort of unsure because we're not really in the perspective of anyone who's like that. So we don't know the specifics of that, but that's part of the world. And I like this whole mythology. And as we hear stories about the gods, you get more and more invested and interested in that story from 300 years ago and how it affects what's happening with these war bands now. So really enjoyed getting to know the world. A slight negative here, and I'll get to this sort of as I go through my negative comments later, is because again, the plot is so fast, we don't get to know locations and like particular cultures and jarls like I would want to. Like I like, just to use another example, like in Lord of the Rings, you have all of these places and the map of Middle-earth really comes alive in your mind, right? You get to know Hobbiton and the Old Forest and the Barrow-wights, Rivendell. You can go through all these places are real places and you kind of have a map of them. You feel this world out. Because this book is so fast, I feel like you don't quite get that. Like I looked, there's a beautiful map at the beginning that even that is very Norse inspired, how it's laid out. So you can see that there. But because the plotting is so fast, as I mentioned, this map doesn't mean as much to me as it would in like a Lord of the Rings or even a Malazan or a Wheel of Time or something like that. Which, again, this is under 500 pages and a very action-packed book. So I don't think Gwynne is trying to do that, but my personal preference is to have more of that world filled out, again, in a more sort of, I don't know if emotional is the right way, but a deeper way than just going through the world. That will lead me to really my biggest negative, and this is, I have to be honest coming out that all of my negatives in this book are like personal preference things. I don't have any like large outstanding errors at all that are done with this book. I think it's really, really good. You'll see in my final grade that I really enjoyed it. But there are some things that just didn't jive quite with me, but I can totally understand why it would jive with others. And the final thing I'm gonna say on that is in the prose section. If there is a continuum of let's say straightforward prose to very descriptive prose, Gwynne is definitely more on the straightforward side of the prose section. It's very easy to digest, as I've said many times. The plot itself is very quick and it is action-packed, and he writes action quite well. Everything very much is stated very clearly. He doesn't get into these elaborate descriptions, and that pays it forward to some of the things I've said forward, where the world is there and it's lush. Well, it's there and it's interesting and I like it, but it's not as lush as it could be. It's not as deep. It's not as transportive as some other authors that I would prefer maybe a little bit more their style. But that also definitely is a preference thing. So I can understand where people like just the clear, straightforward prose that Gwynne represents. I would say, especially if you are like a big Sanderson fan or you like Brent Weeks, those kind of styles of modern fantasy storytelling, I think you're really going to jive with John Gwynne, because even though I'm not usually of that, I will say I really did jive with this book overall. So that would be my overall negative there. The only other thing to mention, again, this is a preference thing, there is a lot of action. And as much as I like some action in my books, I like there to be a little bit more varied. As much as I like, you know, violence and interesting fighting and warfare in my fantasy novels, I also very much like other areas of conflict as well, whether it be intrigue, whether it be political, whether it be interpersonal. I just like more aspects of conflict than just sort of that one flavor. And this I do feel is sort of a one flavor conflict book. It's just warfare. There's hints that there might be more in the future, but in this book, definitely it is only warfare. So all that said, as I said, because even the negatives I have are just small preference things, and that they didn't take away from me enjoying this book, even though it maybe took away from it being sort of one of my all-time favorites, I will absolutely say that Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne is going to get my universal recommendation. I will especially say, again, if you are a fan of Sanderson or obviously Gwynne's other works, or a Brent Weeks, even a Robert Jordan, I think you are going to love this book. It comes out on May 4th, 2021 in the US. If you don't know, pre-ordering books is huge for authors. So especially if you want to take my word for it, or if you're a Gwynne fan, or if you're really looking forward to this, I would recommend pre-ordering it to support this kind of fantasy. It really is a great book to read. So universal recommendation for me from the Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. The link is going to be in the description below if you want to pick it up, and I get a little bit of commission for that. Otherwise, like, share this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, first in, last out.